This is not the video I intended on making, but after more and more personal setbacks, I had to make a decision. It was either watch everything I found remotely interesting and get a list out in the summer again, or cut my losses and try to reset. Even at my most stubborn, I knew I had to change my approach. I still watched enough to pull one match from each month that I really enjoyed, with some honorable mentions sprinkled in because I cannot help myself. Please keep in mind that these are my opinions, and only one match per month leaves so much on the cutting floor, on top of a great deal of matches I never got to in the first place. With that being said, here are some of my favorite wrestling matches from 2025 in chronological order. And as with every video on this channel, we are going by air date and not tape date. In what functioned as an end cap to Saree's stellar 2024, her final showdown with Meiko Satomura lived up to its lofty expectation. Like a great deal of Meiko's retirement run, there is a student-mentor dynamic at play, but with Meiko still wrestling at this level, it felt like there was still one more hill to climb for the Sun God. They do a great job of getting this across in the opening minutes. Meiko dismantles Saree in every which way, and Saree only finds small victories when relying on riskier offense or when getting under Meiko's skin. The calling card of these high-profile Saree matches are all the big explosions, but in a situation like this, they feel more like a necessity than a stylistic choice. If Saree doesn't start throwing bombs, she's going to get steamrolled. Even when landing strikes, you're almost guaranteed that Meiko will have an answer that's just as nasty. The 50-50 exchanges late into the match might be a bit much depending on your taste, but I thought it kicked a ton of ass, and the through line of Saree failing to establish control is consistent throughout. Out of all the violent flurries, she makes two vital errors, going to ground with a sleeper hold being one of them. Meiko's answers early in the match were predominantly mat-based if she wasn't landing a perfectly placed kick, and even in deep waters calmly navigates the situation. Saree then out of desperation starts throwing headbutts, which costs her the match. I think the decisions here put a unique spin on the big Saree match, appropriately framing Meiko as a master of her craft. It's a match that serves as a reminder that even at our very best, there are always lessons to be learned. With all these Saree-ism main events, you can find this one for free on her YouTube page. Honorable mentions to the Tanahashi Shibata 5-minute exhibition from New Japan January 5th and Blue Panther vs Hechicero from CMLL January 10th. Had I done the usual list, this would have been my number one. I said it before and I'll say it again, I never go with my head over my heart with these lists, and nothing speaks to that quite like Goto's triumph in Osaka. For those unfamiliar with Goto's story, he enters this match after 2 decades of never being able to win the big one, and exactly 9 years since the last title shot. But sometime last year there was a groundswell of support. Around that time, he also lost his father, and ahead of the match, he described the dream in which he handed him the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. Put all that together, and you have something that incorporates very real feelings of dreams, perseverance, and grief, on top of it being a killer wrestling match. While this is undoubtedly Goto's match, you do need an antagonist to get it over the line, and I think the way that Zack works this match suits it greatly. It's not the meanest performance, we'll get to that, but it's very efficient. For Goto, it's a chance at personal and professional redemption. For Zack, it's simply business to be handled. The efficiency mentioned comes with work to the arm to take away Goto's greatest weapon, and it's all treated in a way that gives the challenger the obstacles to face without it feeling too overbearing. All this being relayed through Goto's selling channels a vital element of this match, that being the Osaka crowd. It's so easy to get wrapped up in the moment when there's such a tangible connection to the match, and they hang on to every twist and turn with the belief that Goto will finally do it. New Japan at its best is able to find a confluence of those emotions, sticking the landing without having to reinvent the wheel, and all the successes of this match feel just right. Take the finish for example. Zack being an escape artist on every GTR attempt is the perfect way to string you along and ramp up the drama for that big cathartic moment. Every near fall, every rope break, every counter feels just right. I wish I had more to say on the work itself, but with this sort of thing you just have to feel it. Clearly so many did, which made the post-match all the more special. Hiroki Goto couldn't hand the title to his father, but he did get to celebrate with his children, which is an all too real bittersweetness that many of us have to face. Seeing others give their grief to this match gives it a transcendent quality. I know that's a big word to throw around, but I can't think of another wrestling match in recent memory that struck a chord quite like this for so many, and I think that counts for something. In spite of everything, Hiroki Goto never gave up on his dream, and neither should you. Honorable mentions to Mark Briscoe vs Kyle Fletcher from AEW February 8th, and Shinya Aoki vs Keigo Nakamura from DDT February 14th. A Quick Way to My Heart is a match that features two wrestlers throwing an assortment of objects at each other's heads. It's even better when it's two of the sport's great psychopaths doing just that in the junkyard. You could go with other matches from these two, like Fishmon's eternal war with the Sagrada family, or Demus's mugging of Adam Del Castillo, but this one in particular scratched that itch of being abhorrently violent and just an absolute blast. A subtle touch that aids this match is the fact that it took place at sunset, so you do get some interesting shots of the lighting. Rays will peer through the gaps of the tent, or towards the finish, you're left with silhouettes of the wrestlers depending on the camera angle. More importantly though, these two wrestlers make the most of the whole junkyard, and the receding sunlight allows you to see every second of it. I won't list off the entire parade of spots, but some personal favorites include Demus rushing Fishmon with a makeshift helmet, only to get a box full of glassware thrown at him, or a hood of a car being thrown at Demus while he has meat skewers in his forehead. If those sort of things sound appealing to you, there's plenty more ultraviolence to find here. To their credit though, they do handle the trading of momentum well enough. Fishmon has no reason to lose this match, though he simply cannot help himself and beats the hell out of the referee. That lapse of sanity gives Demus a fighting chance, and it just happens to come down to him putting Fishmon through a windshield on his way to victory. This type of wrestling scratches a particular itch, and certainly isn't for the squeamish, but if you're open to it, it's some of the most fun I had watching wrestling in 2025. Honorable mentions to The Hollywood Ending from AEW March 9th, and Chihiro Hashimoto vs Meiko Satomura from Sendai Girls March 19th. This is where my in-person bias comes into play, as I was fortunate enough to say farewell to the Ace in his final match in America. In this last year, I think Tanahashi's physical limitations were a feature and not a bug, and this match leaned into that concept just as well as his other highlights from this retirement run. It helps when you're facing an absolute beast in Konosuke Takeshita, no longer the scrawny kid that Tana dispatched over a decade ago. It reads like the wily veteran making a last stand against someone who outclasses him physically, but they managed to craft a story of redemption and acceptance for Takeshita. DDT would get their win back over Tanahashi and New Japan in 2015, but Soup didn't participate in that match. A win over the Ace is the validation he personally needed before taking that next step. Separating my feelings from the live experience, I think it's a more reeled-in Takeshita performance than most. It seems in these big matches he is susceptible to overreaching and excess, but here he plays his role very well. The gross cutoffs often come at the expense of Tana finding a glimmer of hope. Going back to the live experience though, Tanahashi is unlike anyone I've seen in person. He is just so good at getting you to buy in that even the most obvious result can flip. The few times I was lucky enough to see him, I felt the entire room slowly shift into full investment. Hell, you can actually hear the crowd come unglued on a New Japan of America broadcast. I think that says it all. But like I've stated many times on this channel, belief can be such a cruel thing, and despite our faith in Tanahashi, his slow dismantling at the hands of Takeshita was a foregone conclusion. Between every knee strike, Takeshita could only hide his emotions less and less. As much as he tried to frame this as a DDT versus New Japan thing, it's more of defeating Tanahashi is the closure he seeks, a rite of passage on his own journey before winning the G1 and eventually the world title. And the crazy thing is, they did not need to do this match in America. They could have easily ran a multi-man tag and had Tana play the hits, and I'd still have a fond memory. Instead, the Ace of the Universe left me with a parting gift that I'll never forget. Go Ace. Honorable mentions to Keigo Nakamura and Shinya Aoki vs Astronauts from DDT April 6th, and Meiko Satomura's final matches from Sendai Girls April 29th. Hold for hold, probably the best wrestled match I've seen from 2025. Thinking back to what I've said about both of these men in previous years, it should come to little surprise. Fewer current wrestlers maximize the finest of details and simplest of concepts quite like Shinya Aoki, and when placed across someone with a sumo background like Kazusada Higuchi, every single inch of canvas must be earned. The first half of this is dedicated to that type of resistance, with Aoki's specialty of making the position of a single limb one of the most compelling parts of the entire match. It's when they go outside though, where Higuchi gains ground through brute force. Well, before Aoki chokes him with an umbrella, but that's not the point. The real bulk of the match reveals itself after the madness on the outside, and it comes down to both men failing to upstage each other at their respective strengths. Aoki is in firm control when Higuchi tries to out-wrestle him, and on the flip side, attempting to go through Higuchi with power rarely goes well for anyone. So how does Higuchi navigate the situation? A deadlift brain claw slam is a good start, but it's the way Aoki answers which signals the beginning of the end. Aoki keeps himself in those explosive exchanges for far too long, looking to goad Higuchi into recklessness to attack his arm with submissions. Despite all that great work to the arm, the strategy backfires. Aoki simply goes too far with every headbutt attempt, making himself more and more vulnerable to the signature hold of his opponent. It's one of those cruel swings that you commonly see in other sports. You just can't pull this sort of thing with Higuchi, and the result is one of the outright sickest claw holds I've ever seen, where Aoki is dragged across the mat by his face to the point of submission. Higuchi was back from injury for about 6 weeks at the time of this match, but these 15 minutes truly reminded me of what was missing from DDT for such a long time. This was a brilliant spin on strength versus technique by two of the very best on the planet. Honorable mentions to Mayu Iwatani vs Nanae Takahashi from Marigold May 4th, and Mark Briscoe vs Ricochet from AEW May 25th. It was always going to be a challenge to follow up Goto's big night in Osaka. On top of that, a legitimate injury forced the hand of the booking, but I'll be damned if Zack Sabre Jr. and Hiroki Goto didn't deliver a more than worthy follow-up. Some consider the work here to be superior, though I have a very hard time placing it over the emotional triumph from February, and we're not going to talk about the May match. However, it is in this video for a reason, as I do think it's excellent. If you couldn't tell from the Tanahashi entry, I'm a sucker for the matches where the walls are closing in. The thing with this match is that you're in this space from the opening bell. I find it clever in a way. After being conditioned to Goto losing in these big spots, this whole match is a slow march to it, led by an incensed Zack Sabre Jr. The arm work in February did what it needed to, but this feels way more malicious. The pre-existing injury only makes it worse, but it brings a different aspect out of Goto in a match like this. Goto is damn good in this role of survival, and they milk that in those extended breaks where Zack is just pelting him with kicks. It's clearly a match where he is going out on his shield, but his own resolve is unshaken. Look at how many times he gets back up for strikes with only one functioning arm. It's an ill-fated twist on fighting spirit, and channeling Shibata under these circumstances was also very appropriate. This match is almost 10 minutes longer than the New Beginning, and even with the agonizing nature of it, I didn't think it felt like it. Leaving this match just makes me excited for another meeting, because when you look at what they were able to do under these circumstances, it's quite the achievement. The harsh reality is you can work for something your entire life, finally reach it, and it can all be taken away from you in an instant. The difference now is that we know Goto can do it. It's just a matter of finding one more chance. Honorable mentions to Trevor Lee vs Cedric Alexander from the West Coast Prestige DPW show from June 1st, and Matt Tremont vs Mad Dog Connolly from DPW June 22nd. This is the entry with the most consensus match of the year shouts in the whole video, and odds are you've heard a ton about it already, but at the very least, I can assure you that 5 months later, it still kicks a ton of ass. For their biggest US show to date, AEW puts on a stadium main event in 2025 that really only feels like something you can get from AEW, at least in this decade. That isn't to say these giant, violent spectacles have never taken place in baseball stadiums before, but it's been a while since a major has done so in the States, especially considering how much was riding on Hangman vs Moxley. For all intents and purposes, it's the company's biggest match of the entire year, and it's as big and loud as they possibly could make it. Normally that would create a ton of pitfalls akin to other AEW epics, but something about this one is just undeniable. Hangman enters to the familiar whistle from A Fistful of Dollars, and in spaghetti western fashion, the match makes the viewer privy to the most vile acts in the match. Main event of a major company's biggest show of the year, and only minutes in, you are met with a close-up shot of a man being stabbed with a fork. It's an assault on the senses between both men bleeding buckets, the sound of all the furniture crashing, and Hangman's guttural screams when being dragged through glass, all to the backdrop of a towering light display. The match lives and dies with how over the top it is, and that is complemented by the crowd's anticipation to see Jon Moxley receive the punishment he's had coming for 9 months. It also helps when the man himself puts in another Kingmaker performance in the very same feud, only 2 years removed from the last one. It's a tour de force from the world champion, equally vicious and vulnerable when called for. Few truly live up to the title of ace, but it's matches like these, the ones that can reframe an entire company's outlook, that need someone to toe that line, and Jon Moxley did everything in his power to make this a success. All that praise isn't to take away from Hangman either, but his revitalization required a villain of this caliber to stick the landing of his redemption arc. Your mileage may vary on all the run-ins before the finish, but again, if the point was to be as bombastic and over the top as possible, I think that fits the criteria. It's a hell of a thing, but you probably know that by now. Honorable mentions to Blue Panther vs Lee Moriarty from Ring of Honor July 11th, and Kazusada Higuchi vs Harashima from DDT July 13th. A reminder that pro wrestling doesn't have to be difficult. At a combined age of almost 110, two masters of the craft draw from the purest of sensibilities, creating something that feels timeless. The best heels are those willing to be vulnerable, and Ultimo Guerrero sets this whole thing in motion by doing so. By falling on his ass after attempting to snatch his MLW belt in the title presentation, it drives an incredibly gotten-to champion to jump the maestro before the bell. Getting this kind of heat on Panther so soon, you can imagine how this will go. Last year I talked about a handful of Panther matches, and all of his efforts were incredibly endearing. But something on this night was different. There's so much conviction from Panther, launching himself into all of his offense. You might point to all the dives, and you wouldn't be wrong. At one point he vaulted the ring post for God's sake, but Panther and Ultimo paced each other with their strikes too. And even with all the explosions, the veteran instincts here allowed everything to register for this notorious crowd, which really stood out to me in the audio mix. Normally the commentary track on CMLL's production will take priority, but here it's a much more balanced mix, and you get some wonderful anticipation and feedback from the Arena Mexico faithful. It doesn't make or break what is already a great match, but it certainly complements everything. I love the finish here too. It begs the question if Panther leans into these aerial risks too much, as one more leap gets reversed into a successful pin. It was never a matter of if Panther could resort to flying, but rather if him and the audience got a little too carried away with it. A lot of what I had to say here revolves around Blue Panther, but at this point you'd be hard pressed to find a more reliable wrestler on the planet than Ultimo Guerrero, not only facilitating Panther's acrobatics, but providing him the pushback required to ramp up the drama in the in-betweens. Honorable mentions to Claudio Castagnoli vs Darby Allin from AEW August 27th, and Kazusada Higuchi vs Jun Akiyama from DDT August 30th. Blood and belief in Arena Mexico. A lot of people won't be able to see past MJF, and typically I would understand, but I don't think he overstepped in the ways we're used to by now. In a situation like this, I kept an open mind and wasn't turned away. I think the match is framed in a way to at the very least keep him on task, and let's be real, it's Mystico's match, and was always going to be that way. I knew Mystico ran the razor before I saw this, but the delivery is still shocking. It's such a sick cut, and the second he hits the ring post, crimson is pouring from his mask. The stains set in wonderfully, both on Mystico's solid white gear, but on MJF's skin as well. That visual feedback of the dried blood amplifies his interactions with the crowd. I think the best way I could describe it is that MJF and Honest John did enough. It wasn't a commanding foreign heel performance, though it never drifted into overriding a match seen in his high-profile AEW stuff, where Maxwell often prioritizes being good at doing moves rather than providing what the match needs. I promise this isn't to sound backhanded, because so much could have gone wrong here, but my immersion in what Mystico was doing wasn't broken. There's obviously the shock of blood in Arena Mexico, which has been banned for quite some time, but it's how he handles himself after the cut. The selling of the blood loss is fantastic. Every climb of the ropes or the apron feel agonizing, and there's an added dimension of risk with each dive. He's creating a natural consequence to what is already considered dangerous, and I love it. You'd think you'd see this sort of thing where blood flows more freely, but unfortunately you just don't. Pair that with the visuals of a canvas painted in blood and the sounds of one of the most genuine crowds on the planet, and you get magic. I talked about the cruel side of believing in wrestling, and here you get the flip side. In this environment, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything like it. It makes the karmic justice of Místico's win all the more rewarding. When he fired up and started throwing punches, I just threw my notes out and got enveloped in the rest of the match, and you know what? I'll leave you to do the same. The magic of a big apuesta, driven by a Herculean performance from El Rey de Plata y Oro. Honorable mentions to Jon Moxley vs Darby Allin from AEW September 20th, and Mika Iwata vs Chihiro Hashimoto from Sendai Girls September 23rd. I'm still not sure whether I prefer this to the Coffin match, but the Moxley-Darby blow-off still delivered in spades. It's interesting that they would book this match in a state where blood and fire were prohibited, but knowing that in hindsight makes me appreciate how they worked around these limitations. And before getting into the match, it's worth mentioning that you can hear a fan shrieking in the crowd as the graphic pops up, which is perfect. Given that it is Moxley and Darby, they rose to the challenge with some of the cruelest scenes you will find anywhere. The stair bumps and the meat skewer to the finger come to mind. This pairing has always been able to add layers to the shock horror, best shown with Moxley working the jaw of his opponent. I always love when the ring ropes are incorporated like this, and these two maximize them in such interesting and gruesome ways. I think Darby bleeding from the mouth as a result was a nice way to get that visual feedback without blading. When at even footing, I enjoyed Darby entering the match with the foresight of what has worked before, as seen by an attempt at the all-in finish, or trying to shell-shock Moxley with the lighter fluid. The whole point here though is to meld the Darby death formula with classic pro wrestling sensibilities, so they put Darby through the worst of a Death Rider's hostage situation. The Claudio table throw, and an attempted drowning, all set the stage for Sting to chase off the Great Evil one more time. I think of all the times they could have pulled this card, but this was really the perfect moment to do so. With Mox all alone, he knows he's finished, and quite frankly, he has been for a while. It was only because of Pac that Mox beat Darby in Toronto, and his facade is pulled back as soon as his faction is chased away. Mox quitting as soon as the Scorpion Deathlock was applied was criticized by many, but the whole point of the stipulation was Darby calling Moxley's bluff. The second the challenge was issued, Moxley already lost. This is all about publicly dismantling the bully's veneer. On top of that, a verbal surrender isn't quite the same as tapping out, and I appreciate that this was explored amongst all of Moxley's major losses in the back half of the year. Another brutal and cathartic standout from one of AEW's greatest pairings. Honorable mentions to Sari Yamaoka vs Chihiro Hashimoto from Marigold October 26th, and Roderick Strong vs Eric Stevens from DPW that also aired on October 26th. A sleeper hit from AEW television, as they had a lot going on in November. Fact of the matter is, it's just a case of two of their better TV workers going strength for strength. It's redundant to praise Claudio Castagnoli as a base at this point, but they really do get so much mileage out of the dynamic he has with Orange Cassidy's lucha background. Considering the familiarity between the two, they get so much out of these routine setups where it feels like anything can happen. By revisiting those throughout the match, it also makes the successes of every pop-up or suplex attempt feel earned when Claudio can finally execute. OC enters this match prepared, pulling out all the stops with counters. These days you can get a counter-laden match that often feels played out, but this comes off as more of these two trying whatever they possibly could to get an advantage. Seriously, OC going from vertical suplex to sleeper to getting in a giant swing while in sleeper position is just flat out insane. These flurries are supported by structure when Claudio is firmly in control, giving OC something else to work toward as his attempts to lean into his shtick are unsuccessful. With the themes of escalation in this match, it's fitting that OC couldn't get his hands into his pockets until he's on the turnbuckles, and then the ensuing finishing stretch sticks to this as well. It feels like everything else is thrown with so much velocity behind it. And in general, there's just so much cool stuff littered throughout. A Stundog Millionaire into the ring, Claudio deadlifting Orange by his waistband at one point, and the coin flip of a finish that sees Orange Cassidy eating an uppercut from what seems like 30 feet in the air. It's just an awesome match, one that I feel slipped through the cracks compared to a lot of other AEW picks. Considering these two were subjects of some nonsensical takes throughout the year, I think this match is a good reminder that they're both still fantastic wrestlers that have a comfortable place in AEW. Honorable mentions to Chihiro Hashimoto vs Sari from Sendai Girls November 15th, and Shinya Aoki vs Konosuke Takeshita from DDT November 30th. A match that lasts an entire 8 seconds, but one that I think puts a wonderful end cap on DPW's finale. I think the visual alone of LeBron Cozone reaching the summit would have been a fitting conclusion, but Trevor Lee and Adam Priest being so committed to being insufferable pricks provided the ultimate feel-good send-off. It's yet another reminder that pro wrestling does not have to be hard. The 4th anniversary show was great from top to bottom, and it's a shame that the promotion is shutting its doors after they've continued to improve year upon year. As disappointing as the situation is, these 8 seconds are the ultimate payoff to their stellar run in 2025, and I'd be remiss not to celebrate them. Farewell DPW, you will be sorely missed. Honorable mentions to the final Bob Momo Banana vs Team 200 kg match from Sendai Girls December 26th, and you know what, just a Continental Classic free space. There's plenty to choose from. And that is it from me. If you got this far into the video or even skimmed through it, thank you very much. I know this wasn't how I like to do year-end stuff in these parts, but hopefully this will act as a stopgap to allow me to do so next year. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to do all the obligatory YouTube stuff by liking and subscribing, as we have a lot to do on this channel going forward. In the meantime, you can find me on socials at OuterStevan. I hope 2026 treats you well, and I'll talk to you again next time with ECW in 1995.